Bubby number two here, coming at you with a quick post-production edit. Just wanted to say that the software I was using to pick up my audio did not pick up my microphone, so I will not be making an appearance in this Bubbycast. Also in this Bubbycast, there may be some spoilers for some movies and video games. Other than that, enjoy.
Hey, Bubba. Good morning. Welcome to the Bub. We have us today, one of the OG Bubbies,
Heyo,
Mark,
Uncle Mark.
Uncle Mark.
Get it right.
Uncle Mark was one of the first people to really introduce me and my Bubby to video games and sci-fi movies and cheesy 80s stuff and the like. So it's kind of neat considering that we like that type of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of the stuff that you guys play and that, we always talk about and, movie quotes galore from old movies and everything and even references we do, you guys pretty much right on top of and have been. And I know that you guys used to call me up like every new Legend of Zelda game that was released. You were like, oh my God, have you seen the trailer? And I'm like, yes, I have. And you're like, oh, it's going to be so epic. I'm getting a new system for that game. So, which I'm assuming you guys are then, Garrett, are going to get a Nintendo Switch so you can play Breath of the Wild.
I think we've talked about the Switch in previous occurrences, but it does look pretty cool. Breath of the Wild is definitely something that I'm looking forward to. Looks pretty cool. I really like how it looks almost more like a open world type thing that they got going on.
It really reminds me of Twilight Princess in a lot of ways too, because I feel like even from the early games, some of the characters that you see in the game, like the Zoras and some of the other characters, the first appearance of those characters, they didn't really have a name, like the Gorons, really, you know what I mean? And really until Ocarina of Time, when you started to get those races. And then even in that scale, you're figuring it's a Nintendo 64 with the power, they didn't really have the ability to make a really expansive world to kind of segment all of those different groups and races across the map. I feel like Twilight Princess was really one of the first ones that really, it was an expanse. Like when you were riding your horse across Hyrule, it took a while to get to each of those areas and they felt distinctly different. And I feel like that's the trend that's kind of definitely continuing because of the power of the system.
Yeah, and visually too, I think it looks great. From what we've seen so far of the structures and stuff that's been released, it has a sort of like destroyed world type of vibe going on.
Mm-hmm.
It looks really neat. I'm just hoping the Wii U performance is still decent, but that's something that obviously we can't really know until it comes out. But I doubt, considering how much time Nintendo's kept with the Wii U, I doubt that they would make a port that wasn't up to quality.
That was a reason I even stuck with getting Twilight Princess on GameCube because, at that time, the first Wii was relatively new. And so I think a lot of people didn't really know what the experience was going to be like on the system. And, that was one of the last big release titles for GameCube. And that's what I played it on. And I'm glad I did because I had a more traditional controller as opposed to using the motion control for everything. But I have to say, and I hate to say it because you guys know I've always been a really big fan of the Zelda series in general, but I never actually played through Skyward Sword. I had borrowed it from a friend, and I even bought the Wii Motion Plus just so I could kind of experience it more accurately. But yeah, it's still, I could not get over the motion controls because even with the little add-on piece, I didn't feel that they were actually really precise. And so that's, of the major Zelda titles, that's the only one that I haven't played, obviously, except for Breath of the Wild.
I actually have not played it either, but I did watch Garrett play through it because of the same reasons. I definitely was not a fan of the motion control of the Wii whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
I saw the appeal to it, but I just preferred the more traditional gaming, which is also why I was glad we got it on GameCube. I was able to play it on the Wii before, and I don't know if you remember this, but the Wii version also was mirrored completely in the opposite direction.
Yes, I read that because Link is normally a lefty.
Mm-hmm. And it was a really disorienting experience. Even playing it, it just felt wrong. Story-wise and like gameplay-wise and just world-wise in general, definitely a very interesting area and world that was built for it. The whole sky city area, part of the world. It was almost like an expanded version of the Sky Temple in Twilight Princess, which I really liked. But it was just the motion controls that I personally just couldn't get behind, so it ended up being a reason I didn't play it. But anyways, to get back to the Switch and the new Zelda, with the way the controller scheme is, going back to like a pseudo, more classic style of control, I think will probably help out the game in general. The motion controls in some aspects were a sort of gimmick, but I think it'll help out and be a better experience just sticking to a more standard control setup.
I'm hesitant now because I don't have a Wii U system currently, and I don't have a Switch yet, but I'm half debating on actually playing it and getting a Wii U just because I know they're almost at end of life, and like Nintendo stopped producing them, but just to pick one up so I can play it on the Wii U, because I always did like the idea. I mean, I think Nintendo again was kind of pushing it a little bit to get, the kind of bridging the gap between a portable device and something that you put at home. And I think the Switch is even more so trying to push in that direction. But even the few experiences that I had playing on the Wii U with friends like Mario Party and even some of them, the more recent, like, Super Mario 3D Land, the graphics, I mean, graphically, I thought the system looks fantastic. So as long as Breath of the Wild, like, kind of remains just as good, I mean, I'm half tempted to just buy an old system, frankly, before I jump into the new one.
Yeah, especially considering that the price of the Wii U is likely going to be a lot cheaper than the Switch, especially in like the early times that the console is going to be out. The library for the Switch isn't going to be as developed as the Wii U currently is. I think, like you said, we could see Wii U as like a sort of second-hand console become popular in sales and whatnot.
Yeah, did you guys? I don't remember how into the Metroid series you guys were, but that was another thing, and that just reminded me when we were talking about motion controls. I played through both Metroid Prime and Prime 2 Echoes on the GameCube, and I actually thought both of those games were fantastic. It took me a while to actually get into them, but then when I finally played through them, I was like, wow, they did such an incredible job with that, switching it from 2D to 3D space. And I was really into it. And then, of course, on the Wii, I bought Prime 3, and I couldn't get into it again because of the motion controls. They were just so odd. Like, it felt weird having to point the remote at the screen to be able to play that game. And I think, like you said, Logan, I think that they definitely went a route of being kind of gimmicky. Mm-hmm. And I think, honestly, that's why you're seeing more traditional controllers come back, because I think people are over that and being like, okay, the games are way easier to play when you're just sitting with a traditional controller.
Yeah. You can see even besides the Wii, there was like PlayStation Move and the Xbox Connect, like even attempts by other companies didn't exactly end up super well. It wasn't even just like a Nintendo hardware problem itself, just in general, the attitude to them wasn't as favorable as maybe it was. Mm-hmm. Especially because some companies in the past, maybe for ports, have been less than stellar. The sort of shift to movies a little bit, I don't remember, but Mark, did you ever watch John Wick, the first one?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, the second one, as Garrett can attest, was awesome. I saw it the second time with Garrett just the other night, and just as good. If you haven't seen it, I would say definitely worth watching.
Yeah, I'd like to. Definitely. Yeah, I had my one friend ask me, that I'd seen it, and he goes, "Have you seen John Wick 2?" I was like, "No." He goes, "He kills everyone." That was his review.
That's fairly accurate, for sure. Hit the vein, Garrett. Oh boy.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought the other one kind of came out of nowhere. I mean, obviously, Keanu being like so popular with the Matrix series and everything, and then kind of having some sort of secondary roles where he wasn't as involved in the action genre. I know he did. What was the movie? Was it called 13 Assassins or something?
I know. I think it was. Are you talking about 37 Ronin?
Was totally completely wrong. Yes, 37 Ronin. I really wanted to see that, and I never did. And it looked awesome. I mean, it was kind of like sci-fi fantasy action.
It was super bad.
Oh, it was.
But yeah, that me having seen that, made it even more surprising when John Wick came out. His movies haven't been great recently. If you like the first one, the second one is just definitely an improvement in almost every aspect. If you like the first one, I think you would definitely enjoy the second one. Some people say it's better. It's definitely not worse. It's as good. I think, if anything, the action specifically, the kills and all that has definitely been upped a little bit. There's some pretty brutal things going on.
And I saw obviously in the preview that there's a reuniting of Neo and Morpheus with Lawrence Fishburne in the movie.
Mm-hmm. He plays a pretty funny role. It's a minor role, but definitely has some funny interactions.
I think that's really cool to get those guys back together. I think that they just had such history. That was cool. Yeah, that was one I wanted to see. What about did you guys? I'm assuming did you guys see the first Lego movie?
I saw the Lego movie. Yes.
Have you seen Lego Batman? It was hilarious. I think they did a really good. I actually think even for an animation movie, where I think a lot of animation movies lately are really trying to appeal to both kids and adults, like, silly, goofy stuff that kids get, but then stuff that goes over little kids' heads that, the adults are like, hey, that's pretty clever. But I think that there was a really good commentary really on just Batman films in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I heard. It definitely looked pretty interesting in many regards. Will Arnett doing the voice of Batman, I think, is something. It's been kind of surprising, but he as a voice actor has really been doing more and more roles. I'm not sure if you've ever watched the show, Mark, but on Netflix there's the animated show BoJack Horseman.
No, is he BoJack?
Yeah, he's BoJack, and it's a pretty adult-centric animated show, but that one is pretty good. But yeah, it made me excited seeing the previews for him as Lego Batman, especially after the first movie. But yeah, it's definitely something, even as like a guy that's not necessarily in the demographic that those movies are maybe shooting for. It definitely is something that I would want to see.
Yeah, he does a really good job. It's almost like at first you think it's kind of very much a very cliched knockoff of the Christian Bale Batman voice, but in reality it kind of makes sense if you look back over the history of all the Batman films, all of them. I mean, Michael Keaton, the only one that really didn't was Adam West, but Michael Keaton even did his Batman voice versus his Bruce Wayne voice. And, I've heard some people say, obviously, with Bale's, his just kind of got progressively worse, where it almost got silly. But I just recently, before I went and saw that, we had just recently watched Batman Begins again, and the voice just feels appropriate. I think that's the best way I can describe it. But I'm planning on, I'm finishing up Syndicate right now. And then I think I'm going to start Uncharted 4, which I actually recommended that series to a friend just to get him on a PS3, and he did, and he loved it. And then he eventually got Last of Us, and then obviously going the whole Naughty Dog route, he got Uncharted 4. And all the reviews I've heard from friends who I personally, are friends with that play a lot of the similar games, they were all like, this was an incredible game. My friend even claims that Naughty Dog is probably his favorite developer currently that's making games, just because of how good the narrative is and graphically and everything else like that, and just gameplay. He said Uncharted 4 definitely does not disappoint, so I'm looking forward to getting on that one soon.
Yeah, that was one of the series that when we did have a PS4 for a while there, I kind of regret that I wasn't able to fully get into it. When we had the PS4, I bought The Last of Us at one point and never got around to playing it before we sold it. But yeah, that was always I always remember when we were younger, he would tell us about the Uncharted series. You're like, dude, it's awesome.
They really are. I mean, but a lot of, you got to think too, like, with the recent Tomb Raider reboots, I mean, this is kind of what I feel like the equivalent of like people who were big PC gamers that, grew up playing and loving the original Tomb Raider games. I think the idea of the exploration, obviously violence is sort of prevalent in all games, but like the idea of the actual exploration and the discovery of things and the worlds that you visit and all of that, I think is what really jazzed a lot of people up about those games. And I think that was really one of the balances that Uncharted got right. And I usually tell people, like, Uncharted to me is like Indiana Jones as a video game, but like the three good ones, not Crystal Skull, the three good ones as a video game. And Crystal when you Skull play it, yeah. Did you say it was a masterpiece?
Yeah.
But the story is good. The characterization is excellent. the worlds that you play in are good, and obviously technically pushing it, normal nerdy stuff like draw distances and ambient occlusion and all that stuff that was really pushed to the limit on the PS3 with a game like Uncharted 4. I mean, it was like a no-brainer when it came to making it on PS4 and just the power that you'd be able to do it. So like I said, I played the beta, and I haven't even seen the real game, but I've heard that it's gorgeous. And Tomb Raider kind of died. It was kind of like, okay, now let's see how ridiculous Lara Croft is going to get in the game. And then when Uncharted came out, and these people, the developer like Crystal Dynamics and people who started taking over the Tomb Raider franchise, saw what could be possible with a game that basically was exactly their genre, I think it forced them to make a better game. And that first Tomb Raider game I thought was incredible. It very much reminded me of Uncharted, except it was way more violent. I think it was super, super violent compared to Uncharted.
Yeah, that was something when the Tomb Raider series was rebooted with the first one a couple years ago. And it struck me. I was just like, oh man, I'm not sure if you ever saw the clip that Conan O'Brien did, where he was playing that game, the first game, and they were going down the section where like Laura's going down like the river. And then one of the parts that if you do the QuickTime event, it would like impale her on like a log.
Oh yeah.
Kill her, and he kept messing up. So kept getting like impaled over and over again. And it was like, oh man.
Yeah, it was a good game. I think it was, I kind of think the Uncharted games, I mean, the tone was definitely different, and I totally get that. The Uncharted games are kind of in some ways a little tongue-in-cheek. Sully's character in the Uncharted series pretty much plays like comic relief. And even Drake, to some extent, has just some very funny quips. And I think that kind of kept the tone lighthearted, even though, if you were to look at the final kill count of the game, you probably smoked hundreds of bad guys. You know what I mean? Like almost more than like even the first Assassin's Creed game. Like everyone you see, you have to kill. But yet it still felt like it was kind of lighthearted in that sense. But with Tomb Raider, you go up to a guy, and the silent takedown for Tomb Raider, once you get your like ice axe, is to ice axe them in the back of the head.
Oh, man.
There was no like silent takedown or like, hold their mouth until they just go to sleep or whatever. It was pretty much to pickaxe them in the face. And I was like, "Ooh, that's they're really going for violence and then some more." There wasn't really an intermediary ground to that.
Yeah, there's definitely some games that have advocated that sort of style, which definitely isn't necessarily a bad thing. I don't think it's definitely interesting from time to time whenever you do get that interaction, especially when you're not expecting it, because sometimes games you just think it's going one way and then no. A game that even without like sort of super realistic style of graphics that still has a surprising amount of violence was the Hotline Miami games. Very extremely, almost grotesquely violent at some points, and it's just like an 8-bit pixelated style, and it's like, oh wow. But yeah, those have been out for a while, and I think are pretty well received. But yeah.
I mean, you get a game like Broforce. I mean, but it just because of the pixel, like it just makes it different. Like everything in Broforce explodes, everyone explodes, every dog, animal, human you come across will explode, and it's kind of funny. I mean, it reminds you of those little arcade games where like you jump on the head of someone and they just basically splat. With like, the limited palette that they could use to show like blood or guts or whatever. But essentially that was the same thing that was happening. I think a lot of these games, those games like that have kind of captured that spirit where it just doesn't feel as real, I guess. You know what I mean? Like Mario jumping on the head of every enemy. You don't realize that he's killing them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because they kind of just disappear. And to get back to Zelda for a second, I think actually Zelda was one of the franchises that sort of realized what was happening with games because of the realism. And they opted to do something different. And I think I want to say I mean, their enemies have always sort of just exploded, but I feel like the game that did it in sort of more realistic fashion was with like Wind Waker, and then obviously with Twilight Princess as well, where like the characters like exploded into those black Twilight blocks when you killed them. So there wasn't necessarily blood, even though you were killing enemies. And so a game like that, you could pretty much appropriately play even in front of little kids, and they would go, "Oh, the bad guy's just going away." You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think there's definitely times that it's better to be a little less graphic. But I think when ultra violence can be done like tastefully, as almost contradictory as that sounds. It really just depends on what type of form and like just overall tone. Violence alone by itself can be distracting and bad in a way, but when it comes together in an overall coercive piece, then it really makes it a better experience.
And I think if it's done to obviously assist the narrative, like if the narrative calls, if the tonality and the narrative of the game, it makes sense for these kind of things to happen, I think then that's where you kind of get the warranted stuff. But obviously we could talk at length at another time for just like maturity ratings on games and what that really means. And people have a problem with the ESRB and all the ratings boards, just thinking that they just don't really prevent games from staying out of the hands of kids and stuff like that. But I think that's a completely different discussion, because I do think that the games that are rated mature should be rated mature. And I think if you're someone who is mature and old enough to play them, then that's the experience you're going to get. But I think I think it really comes down to parents that are just completely clueless as it relates to games, and will buy a kid a game, not even really realizing what the heck they're even buying for their kid. And I think that's the biggest problem. I will say though, like Battlefield 1, I'm sure Garrett, because you've been playing it for a while now, like they definitely, and I don't know if this was just a choice based on, again, this is one of those questions you would have, is the choice based on the weaponry used at the time, because to sort of add to the realism of just the horror and the devastation. But like the melee kills with the bayonet are probably some of the most brutal kills that they've actually put in any of those games so far.
Yeah, and even though there may be more like gory games like Gears of War, for an example, a more realistic form of violence is in part worse than like a exaggerated, gross, like bloody pulp 80s type of violence.
Oh yeah, and especially like if you're talking aliens or something like that, like it's almost to be expected that you can't have the same level of feeling towards like an alien beast being versus a human. Like it's just not the same thing. Well, if you guys had any other comments about some of the games, but I will say I wanted to thank you guys for reaching out to me for this episode. Yeah. And I think it's fun. So I hope you guys keep it going. And I think it would be really cool. I know a lot of like, with doing podcasts and things like that, the stuff that you guys are covering are great. I mean, you're going back to old stuff and referencing old things that you guys have kind of grown up with, and then talking about stuff that's current. So keep it up, man.
Yeah. Thanks for coming in. This is definitely probably the episode that's been the most actually cohesive about talking about things.
I see. I bring a little bit of class into this.
Yeah, and not just a bunch of random memes and and other places. So this is definitely fun. All right. Well, yeah.
Yeah, I got one. It's from Batman Begins. Where's Rachel? Like, see, that's pretty much what I want to say. I think that sums up all of my feelings.
Oh yeah, one final thing before we go is that we got Dad to watch Batman vs Superman the other night, and I think he agreed with us that that the Martha one of the most ridiculous plot devices in a major Superman Batman film.
Wait a second, my mom's name is Martha too.
It reminded me of Step Brothers when they're like, "Did we just become best friends?" Yup.
John Stamos, Velociraptor.
All right,
awesome.
well, thanks again, Mark.
Yeah, guys, thanks.